He just forgot to fasten the seatbelt on the plane before falling asleep, but he didn't expect to accidentally save his life. Just as the woman was awakened by a sudden jolt, the fighter jet whizzing past her outside the window instantly startled her and widened her eyes in shock. The huge impact instantly shattered the flight into pieces, while the woman was thrown into the hardest interruption of the aircraft structure. Faced with the constantly falling fuselage, the woman exerted all her strength, desperately trying to grab the uneven roof of the cabin, but unfortunately, the high-speed airflow was too strong, and the weak man had no resistance at all. However, surprisingly, after being washed away by a strong mist, the woman was fortunate enough to be pushed onto the seat next to her. Seeing this, he didn't have time to think much. He immediately tied his seatbelt behind him in a panic, and then suppressed his inner fear, constantly praying in his heart, hoping for a miracle to happen. Subsequently, the plane swayed like a scattered leaf and fell into a towering dense forest. When she woke up from her coma again, the woman had already sat in a pile of tattered wreckage. He couldn't believe that everything that had just happened was true. However, the excruciating pain caused by the steel needle piercing his calf cruelly pulled him back to the cold reality before his eyes. So, without much time to think, the woman quickly suppressed her inner unease, untied her seatbelt, and then vigorously grasped the hard steel needle on her legs with both hands. Because at this moment, he was very clear that if he didn't quickly deal with the bleeding wound, his own life would soon be in danger. Slightly relieved the pain in front of her, the woman came up with a quick idea and tore open the skirt on her body. She then carefully wrapped her calf, hoping to have a certain hemostatic effect. She then used all her strength to stagger up and shouted loudly around the wreckage, hoping to receive a response from her husband. But I didn't expect that the cabin was still quiet and terrifying at this moment, with only the body of a fellow passenger not far away, still emitting a desperate atmosphere. Looking out at the endless jungle, and then thinking about her husband who was still uncertain about his life and death, the woman instantly fell into deep despair. The dual blow of his body and mind made it impossible for him to see the possibility of survival. In a moment of impatience, he suddenly collapsed involuntarily. Unexpectedly, at this moment, things unexpectedly took a turn for the better. In the deep jungle, a faint roar of search and rescue helicopters suddenly came, confirming one's speculation. The woman ignored her inner fear and immediately reached out to pull off the scarf on the body behind her. Then, she quickly dragged her leg, which was in constant pain, and ran frantically in the direction of the sound. The woman exhausted all her strength and kept shouting at the top of her lungs, but she didn't expect that due to the towering forest, the search and rescue efforts were not paying attention to his plea for help. Seeing this, the woman once again fell into deep despair. On the way back to the wreckage, the woman constantly encouraged her scarred self from the bottom of her heart. She kept telling herself that since she survived the disaster, there would definitely be good fortune. Since the search and rescue team has arrived, they will soon find the piece of wreckage where they woke up. So a little hope reignited in the depths of my heart, and a bitter smile couldn't help but appear on my face. Unexpectedly, before he could return to the cabin, he was suddenly stunned by the sight in front of him and froze in place. I saw it in the cockpit that I saw as my hope for survival, where a brutal tiger was constantly gnawing on the body of its companion. Watching the hungry beast slowly approaching her, the woman was instantly frightened and her spine shivered, standing still and afraid to move. Fortunately, the search and rescue helicopter hovering over the forest happened to pass over their heads at the moment. I have never seen a tiger in such a battle before. I was immediately intimidated by the loud roar and panicked, turning around and running away. Upon seeing this, the woman immediately collapsed to the ground, grateful that she had finally escaped another calamity. After a moment of calmness, the woman instinctively examined the wound on her leg. This was a bird smell that suddenly caught his attention, so the woman boldly reached into the bushes and realized it was just a toy that had fallen into the woods. As she watched the passenger's tattered belongings and thought about her husband who might have encountered an unexpected situation, the woman's mood once again plummeted, and she couldn't help but shed tears of despair. However, just as he picked up a tree branch in the shape of an airplane, a vague memory suddenly surged into his mind. The woman vaguely remembers hearing the pilot say before departure that the destination of this journey was to fly westward all the way. That is to say, the cabin where my husband first crashed must have fallen to the east of his own location. Recalling the scene where her husband once told her how to magnetize a steel needle, the woman suddenly seemed to think of something, so she quickly took off the toy, rubbed the safety pin on her chest without parking it on her skirt, and quickly placed it on a leaf in a puddle of water. The next second, the magnetic steel needle fruit needle slowly points towards the North Pole with suspended leaves. I'll go. Here you are. After clarifying the direction of her husband's cabin, the woman quickly ran anxiously to the river to replenish her energy. He picked up a worn-out plastic bag as a water storage tool, ran back to the cabin to collect all possible useful materials, and then viciously broke the high heel on the shoe. He then firmly fixed the shoe on the foot with a cloth strip. With everything in place, the woman reluctantly took a last glance and saved her cabin, then resolutely embarked on a journey to find her husband. However, she did not expect that things were far from as simple as she had imagined. Before she could walk much further, the woman was suddenly shocked to find that in this desolate and primitive jungle, strange noises from unknown animals could always be heard inexplicably, and the ubiquitous dead branches and steep breaks also make the road ahead always seem particularly rugged. Looking around at the endless forest, the woman was both anxious and helpless. However, every time she recalls the bits and pieces of her and her husband's happy life, the woman still doesn't stop her footsteps, because at this moment, he fully understands that in order to create a glimmer of vitality for her beloved husband, she must grit her teeth and remain strong. Gradually, the woman crossed the towering hillside and walked into a flat grassland. She saw that she could finally save some energy, and the woman's suspended mood was finally relieved. However, she did not notice that the land under her feet had started to become more muddy. The woman tried hard to pull out her calf that had stepped into the swamp, but she didn't expect that the harder she tried, the deeper she sank. In an instant, half of her body had already been dragged into the quagmire. In desperation, the woman kept flipping through the boiling in front of her. She stretched her arms to the limit, grabbed a nearby branch, and then exerted all her strength, constantly dragging her body outward. Supported by a strong desire for survival, the woman was finally able to emerge from the swamp. And at this moment, he was left exhausted all over, and there was also a deep inner fear. The swamp in front of me is completely impassable, and unfortunately, women can only take another detour. On the steep and deep mountain, he struggled to climb up with crutches in both hands, his mind filled with fond memories of her and her husband's past. The harder you move forward, the more pain you will feel in your legs, and finally you will have to overcome the danger of deep diving. At this moment, the woman who was injured suddenly slipped her foot and rolled down the hillside with a firm grip the next second. Helpless, the woman could only lie on the ground and use her limbs to work together to finally overcome this difficult obstacle. Unexpectedly, misfortune never comes alone. Just as the woman was limping and preparing to continue eastward, the tiger that had been starving before suddenly appeared again in front of her. Without much thought, the woman quickly threw away her cane, endured the pain, and ran away. However, healthy people cannot yet shake off beasts, let alone those who are injured. In just an instant, the wild tiger had already chased the woman's side. After recovering from a severe dizziness, the woman found herself falling into a steep deep pit. He was hit by a huge impact and couldn't stand up for a long time. The good news was that the tiger didn't dare to jump off easily, so she chose to turn around and leave. The road is endless, and the woman followed the gentle slope at the other end of the deep pit back to the ground, but unexpectedly found another part of the wreckage from the disintegration of the passenger plane. Upon seeing this, the woman quickly opened the scattered suitcase on the ground, only to find a crucial lighter that had actually been dug out. In the blink of an eye, the sky quickly darkened. The woman immediately lit up a bonfire and lay gratefully beside it. He knew that as long as the fire didn't go out, no wild beasts dared to approach again. So he could finally enjoy the hard-earned warmth in front of him with peace of mind, and his mind was still reminiscing about the happy time he had spent camping with his husband. After a night's rest, the woman's physical strength was greatly restored. So, at dawn, he climbed to the highest mountain peak in his sight, hoping to attract the attention of search and rescue personnel. However, he did not expect the helicopter that was still hovering nearby yesterday to disappear completely. The strong woman couldn't help but be extremely disappointed, but this trip was not without success. Just as the woman was excitedly looking towards the river, she unexpectedly discovered the nose of the plane that had crashed, where there must be tools that could communicate with the outside world. So without much thought, the next second, the woman hurriedly went down the mountain to the riverbank. Faced with the extremely turbulent water flow, a woman who knew she couldn't swim dared not hesitate at all. With her imagined encouragement from her husband, she bravely endured the excruciating pain of her wound and walked into the river. After a thrilling and intense struggle, she finally touched the stone on the opposite bank. After a brief gasp, she finally saved her life once again. Fortunately, although there were no signs of life and the cockpit and communication equipment had been completely destroyed, he found a very important signal gun and 2 intact bullets in the cabin box. Seeing this, the woman couldn't conceal her inner excitement, so she quickly trembled and loaded the bullet, then fired it into the sky. Unfortunately, the altitude of the signal flare was limited and did not achieve the expected effect. Seeing this, the woman no longer dared to act recklessly. She knew that only by returning to a high altitude to launch could she still catch the attention of search and rescue personnel. So she dragged her wet body and continued to climb towards the hillside behind her. But I never expected that the weather in the rainforest would be unpredictable. Just now, the sun was shining brightly, but in the blink of an eye, it became dark clouds and a piercing wind, unable to withstand the cold in front of me. The woman quickly sat down under a tree, then drew dry branches and prepared to light a bonfire to dry her clothes. She was shocked to find that the lighter soaked in the river water could not be ignited at all. In desperation, the woman could only temporarily put a plastic bag over her head, hoping to slow down her own heat loss. Seeing the package of a victim on the tree, the woman instantly saw hope again and quickly took it off with a branch, hoping to obtain the life-saving supplies she urgently needed. However, it wasn't until I saw the familiar hand-drawn notebook that I was surprised to recognize it as my husband's backpack. The woman excitedly flipped through the little things her husband had painted for her, and the past they had experienced together instantly became vivid. Recalling those beautiful moments in the past, the woman couldn't help but shed tears of injustice. However, tears did not flood her mind, as with the appearance of the backpack, the woman also instantly realized that her husband should be nearby. The rain quickly soaked through his entire body, but the woman remained unmoved and continued to stumble, constantly searching forward. And the emperor lived up to those who had intentions. Just as the woman passed through a muddy pit, she finally saw the familiar figure again. Ignoring the excruciating pain of the wound, the woman immediately slipped into a deep pit without hesitation, and then excitedly rushed to her husband's side, tightly embracing the man who was causing her great concern.
Мой маленький танк. Ты даже сильнее, чем я. Просто сама это.
Seeing that her husband was truly safe and sound, the woman quickly opened his backpack and excitedly brought their wedding ring back to the man's hand, because it was a witness to their love and a pledge to never part with each other. Then she couldn't wait to snuggle up in her husband's arms. Then, in his warm voice, he gradually let go of the misfortunes he had experienced, as well as his inner defenses. Like a comforted child, he fell asleep with a heart full of happiness without realizing it. It wasn't until she was awakened by the loud roar of the engine that the woman was once again brought back to the cold reality. Originally, my husband had already lost his precious life in the air crash. Even though my heart has reached the bottom of my heart, the encouragement from my husband in my mind is constantly motivating the already weathered woman. She knew that her husband wouldn't want to see her give up hope of survival just like this, so she dragged her tired body with tears in her eyes, tried her best to climb the muddy steep slope, and then resolutely pulled out the signal gun, firmly firing the last bullet into the sky. And the emperor does not disappoint those who have intentions. This time, he finally waited for hope to live on. With the help of search and rescue personnel, the woman quickly boarded the plane, leaving the deep mountains and forests. However, unlike before, after experiencing countless tribulations, his eyes towards this forest were no longer filled with the fear he had before, but rather with deep longing and reluctance, because she knew that the man she deeply loved could never leave here again. And hoping to live a happy life has become the last testament left by her husband before his death. Even though unable to part ways, women still bid farewell to their deceased lover with tears in their eyes. At this moment, he silently swore from the bottom of his heart that no matter what difficulties and hardships he would experience, or what unbearable hardships he would endure, he would no longer be afraid to face them head-on, because in the softest depths of his heart, he would never forget that he could bravely live on, which was the greatest wish of his husband's life. This film is adapted from real events and deeply reproduces the true situation of the air crash 40 years ago. As the only survivor among over 100 boxing passengers, he chose to face life optimistically in the days to come. The old man said that it was because of her husband's encouragement that she survived, and he himself will continue to live happily with her last wish. In two simple sentences, the true meaning of life and love is revealed. Therefore, no matter what, please cherish the time in front of you and live with your heart in the present.